Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Coming up on the program, actor Jussie Smollett facing new criminal charges in Chicago. An unofficial name change for Douglas Park. Customer mistreatment of a Spanish speaker in the Pilsen Post Office and an apology by the Postal Service. We visit a unique place to release your rage. But first, you wouldn't have reason to know this unless you've taken a road trip out east lately. But in New Jersey, it is illegal to pump your own gas. Chicago Tonight's Amanda Vinnicki is here with the latest on a proposal that would do the same in Illinois. Amanda, what's the deal?
Brandis, legislation can be really complex. I mean, I'm talking reading bills that are hundreds of pages long. Not this one. The substance of this is just one sentence. The act provides that no gas may be pumped at a gas station in this state unless it is pumped by a gas station attendant employed at the gas station. Now, this is the brainchild of State Representative Camille Lilly, a Democrat from Chicago, who says she actually got the idea from a constituent, a mother of three.
She was often hearing about the carjacking, those kinds of things. And so she was always nervous about going in, paying for her gas, and leaving her children in the car by themselves. And she was like, wait a minute, why do I have to get out and pump gas? And in her community, it became a challenge for her. So she said, can we get the gas attendants everywhere? Because some stations do have gas attendants, but it's not required.
Lilly had the bill drafted, filed it just last week ahead of a looming deadline. The reaction to it has been swift. Feedback is mixed, she says, but a lot of folks have the reaction that Robert Carson did. We chatted with him near a gas station in Lincoln Square.
I think it's stupid. I mean, it would create jobs for the community, but at the same end, it's going to create delays for people who are trying to get their gas and get on their way.
Something that you've been capable of doing thus far in your life?
Yes, I mean, I've done it for many, many years by myself with no issues.
The industry is opposed to. Director of the State Association for Convenience Stores and Petroleum Marketers, Josh Sharp, says drivers are focused on one thing: price. Already, Illinois drivers are paying more at the pump. The state tax on motor fuel doubled this summer to 38 cents a gallon. That's not including the sales tax or local taxes. On average, he says the gas tax burden in Illinois is 52 cents a gallon, one of the highest in the nation. If gas stations had to pay for full service attendants, that'd cost them, and that cost will be passed on to consumers. But not everyone is opposed. I met Jim Trainer when he rolled into a gas station in his '92 Corolla. One of his first jobs, he says, out of high school was pumping gas at a Citgo.
Car pulls up, you run out there, ask how much he wants, fill it up, $2, $5, half a tank. I don't know what half a tank means. Wash the windows, check his tires if he asks. And that was pretty much it back then before they went to self-serve.
Going to self-serve, by the way, happened in Illinois in the early 70s. Trainer says it wasn't a tough job, but there actually was some skill involved.
I was an expert at washing windshields. I didn't mind, I took pride in it. The secret is you got to flip the thing down so you don't have the excess water in there, and then bring a towel with you. So when you swipe, you wipe the rubber off so it doesn't streak.
Hot tip there from Trainer, who says he misses that full service gas stations where a place people could get help with a flat tire or an overheating car. And he wouldn't hate bringing that back.
People that are handicapped, obviously, there's people, the weather. You don't want your grandmother out there. I shoveled the sidewalks for the widow down in my old neighborhood, and it's just more convenient if somebody could pump the gas for them.
Amanda, don't some gas stations make accommodations?
There are some gas stations that have call buttons, so someone who needs assistance can ring for help, but that's not always obvious or convenient because call buttons are not required.
Not every gas station has that. So someone that's disabled have to know where that gas station is, and that's the only gas station they can go to get that kind of service. It is important that we are looking at safety at the pump and convenience at the pump.
Safety and convenience. Lilly says that's the point behind the measure barring people from pumping their own gas. She says she never actually intended for it to pass as is. She wants to jumpstart a conversation. She wants to work with the petroleum industry to reach a compromise.
people bring legislators' ideas, and we start with that vehicle to get the conversation going, to get everything moving. And it was not a bill to mandate anything. That was how it was written, modeled after New Jersey. But we were always had the intention to come in and to shape it with the input of the people, the industries.
Now, as for the matter of safety, Lily did say that's a concern. Fires, people driving away with the gas hose still attached to their vehicle. I checked with various state agencies, but couldn't find any stats on how often emergencies do or don't occur. The Petroleum Marketers Association says there is little risk. Gas pumps now are equipped with valves that seal automatically when there's too much tension on the line. The association says its top concern this legislative session is fighting other recently introduced proposals, including those that would pave the way for more taxes, local taxes on gas.
Oh boy, more taxes. Thank you, Amanda.
Sure thing.
And now to Phil Ponce with the latest on an infamous interchange. Phil.
Brandis, whether you call it the Spaghetti Bowl or its old name, the Circle Interchange, or by its official name, the Jane Byrne Interchange, it is a major headache for Chicago drivers. Consistently listed as one of the worst bottlenecks in the country, a massive project to improve it is causing even more backups and frustrations. Originally on track to be finished by 2018, the latest projection is now 2022. Last week, the Illinois Department of Transportation announced another cost increase, putting the price tag of the reconstruction 50% higher than the original estimate. Joining us to talk about it are Eric Ray. He's Senior Resident Engineer for the Illinois Department of Transportation. Professor P.S. Sriraj, Director of the Urban Transportation Center at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And Mary Wisniewski, transportation reporter for the Chicago Tribune, and welcome all to Chicago Tonight. Eric Ray, this project began in September of 2013 and was supposed to have been finished in 2017. Here we are in 2020 and completion is still a couple of years away. In a word, what happened?
Well, it's not necessarily one thing that happened. It's a bunch of different things that we encounter during construction projects like this. First, this is a massive project with a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of choreography between different contractors and different entities. There are issues with the soils and issues with constraints, design constraints that may have changed from the time that we designed it to the time that we began building. Complex traffic staging between the contracts. These contracts are adjacent to one another, so we have to change traffic in sync between all the contracts because they're very close. We don't have a lot of room and work zone.
Weren't all these things factored into the original projection? Because the original projection was 4.5 years, and now the projection is at least 9 years.
Yes, and there are a lot of things that you don't really know when you start a contract. Once you begin excavating, you encounter things underground, obstructions in different soil conditions. There's weather, there's all types of things in a project like this. Utility conflicts, unknown utilities, things of that nature.
Mary Wisniewski, your reporting has focused on some of these issues. Of the factors that Eric Ray just mentioned, are there one or two that stand out?
I think that what's really important to recognize about this project is that it's in a very tight space. It's right there in the middle of the loop. It's the Kennedy, it's the Dan Ryan, it's the Eisenhower. It connects with there's the CTA is there are utilities there, as Eric mentioned. All of these things, it's not like building something out in the suburbs.
Let's take a look at, here is what the interchange looked like before, and here's what it's supposed to look like after. Eric Ray, why is this an improvement, the after shot?
Well, there are a lot of geometric improvements. There are a lot of safety improvements. There's widening of the northbound Dan Ryan to westbound 290 lanes, and also the eastbound 290 to northbound Kennedy lanes. It's a lot of things that are going to reduce congestion, increase safety, and make it a better intersection overall, less time spent by the public in the intersection. Professor
Sriraj, coincidentally, the building in which you work was actually impacted by the construction work. What happened?
That is correct. About 2014, I believe, there was some construction work very close to the building that we are, which was on the 290. The work was happening, and
on the Ike?
On the Eisenhower, and our building leaned about a couple inches, causing cracks, misalignments of doors. We had to evacuate and relocate to another part of the campus for a better part of a year.
And this was caused by the construction?
This was caused by the construction.
What specifically?
I believe there were some piles that were being driven very close to our building, and our building abuts the Eisenhower Expressway, and so it's hardly less than about 50 feet from the expressway. So it was the combination of the driving force of the pile coupled with a 100-year-old building. The building suffered some damages, and we had to bear the brunt of it by having to move en masse, causing disruption to our work.
Eric Ray, you alluded to this a couple of times. You mentioned the soil. What was the issue with the soil? Because my understanding is that there was a connection between the problems with the soil and what happened with the professor's building.
So I don't know the details of the connection and how that was resolved, but in the interchange in general, we do have a lot of soft soils, silts, clays, soft clays, and they don't have a lot of bearing strength for some of the structures, so we have to change our foundation construction in order to accommodate for that.
So what, you had to dig deeper and put in something thicker?
In some situations, yes, we do have to dig deeper. We may have to drill a hole all the way down to bedrock and fill it with reinforced concrete. In some cases, we may need to do stone improvements, replace soil with stone or aggregate stone columns, different treatments for different situations.
Mary Wisniewski, expand more on why this project was needed to begin with.
This is considered one of the biggest bottlenecks of the country, the biggest bottleneck in the country by the Federal Highway Administration for truck traffic. It's a very confusing, a very complex place to go through. And so the state felt that it needed to improve this. It needed to widen lanes. It needed to make ramps safer. And so that's what, and also it had been built in the 1950s. And so it was felt that, there needed to be improvements and modernizations to the expressway.
Professor, as somebody who studies the urban built environment, do you agree that this new interchange was necessary?
Yes, from a couple of different perspectives. One is the aspect that Mary brought up, which is it is one of the top 10 congested bottlenecks in the country for freight movement, and Chicago being the freight hub for the nation, it is absolutely imperative for us to address that, because the delay is going to affect everyone in society, not just those in Chicago. The other aspect is the infrastructure, which is 60, 70 years old now, needed to be upgraded. The infrastructure was built in 1955 for traffic at that time. Now it's catering to much heavier traffic, and then that's part of the reason why it needed to be attended to.
Eric Ray, the original estimate was that this project would cost about $536 million. The estimate is now close to $800 million. Could it go higher?
Of course, with construction, you could have increases in costs. The good news is that we are about, upwards of 70% done. So the likelihood of additional costs go down the closer you get to completion of the project.
And yet, with 30% still unfinished, there is the potential, depending on what you discover in this last phase, there's the potential for greater costs, yes or no?
There is, yes. There are always unforeseen conditions, latent subsurface conditions, things that we don't know about. We could get some weird weather here. We're approaching spring. It's a lot of different things that could happen. But we do work very hard to make sure that we keep the costs under control. There's a lot of scrutiny whenever there is an increase in cost or a delay.
Professor, how common is it for a project of this scale to have a huge cost overrun the way we're seeing now, and also a much expanded time frame in which to finish?
Not surprisingly, there seems to be significant cost overruns and time overruns on projects of this magnitude all over the world. When I looked at the literature on the research that's been conducted, it seems to be a range of at least 10%, from 10% cost overrun to 200% cost overruns. In the US, at least 77% of the highway projects have cost overruns. And that's a very telling number. And then we have to be cognizant of that and acknowledge that that is going to happen. There are a variety of reasons why those cost overruns happen, but the main thing here is that most of these reasons are technical in nature, at least in this project is concerned.
Mary Wisniewski, going forward in this last 30% of the project, if that's what it turns out to be, what are you going to be looking for?
I'm going to be looking for more cost overruns, going to be looking for more problems. Also I'm advising people to please don't take the Jane Byrne Interchange if you can avoid it. If you can
But it's kind of hard to avoid. I mean, it's where the Ryan meets the Ike meets the Kennedy.
Take public transit is what I advise. And if you're just going through the city and you're not going into the loop, I would advise to take I-294.
Eric Ray, what is it that you would like to leave members of the public with in terms of going forward from this point on?
Well, we are beginning the final stages. We have a lot of work coming up over the next couple of years, but the main thing that I would like to leave people with is to slow down in the work zones, be careful, pay attention, don't use your cell phones, and watch out for workers.
How confident are you that when this is actually completed, it's going to meet its goal of reducing delays and so forth?
Very confident. Even in the completed work that we have so far, for instance, the northbound to westbound ramp from the northbound Ryan to westbound Eisenhower has relieved a lot of congestion. If you take that route, you can already see the impacts. It's only going to get better as we get the project finished. There will be more capacity there.
Well, we will keep our eyes on the story. Eric Ray, Professor Sri Raj, and Mary Wisniewski, thank you all for joining us. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're back with more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so please stay with us.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Actor Jussie Smollett is in new legal trouble. Paris Schutz has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Paris.
That's right, Brandis. A special prosecutor has charged actor Jussie Smollett with 6 new charges, including disorderly conduct and making false police reports. This comes several months after Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx dropped 16 counts of felony disorderly conduct. Smollett has been accused of staging a racist and homophobic attack on himself in the Streeterville neighborhood. In August, a Cook County judge named former U.S. Attorney Dan Webb as special prosecutor to investigate several aspects of this case, including why it was dismissed by Fox, who is seeking re-election to her office. And in a statement, the Friends for Fox campaign called the, quote, James Comey-like timing of the charging decision questionable. Quote, just 35 days before an election, which can only be interpreted as further politicization of the justice system, something voters in the era of Donald Trump should consider offensive. Smollett is expected to appear again in court on February 24th. A coalition of community groups held a sit-in this afternoon, and they say they met with aldermen and representatives from Mayor Lori Lightfoot's office. They are demanding the city improve the stock of affordable housing around the proposed Obama Center in Jackson Park. More specifically, they're supporting an ordinance that would call for 30% of all new housing in the area to be set aside for affordable units, and for a fund that would help offset rising rents and property values for residents. The mayor's office says it has held 15 separate meetings with Woodlawn residents on this issue and that discussions are ongoing. Illinois is the first state in the country to provide local testing for the deadly novel coronavirus. The state's Department of Public Health says it is now able to conduct testing out of its Chicago office to anyone displaying some of the respiratory symptoms of coronavirus. The state says results will be available quickly and it will soon be able to test in downstate offices as well. The coronavirus death toll has now surpassed 1,000 people in China and reportedly infected nearly 43,000. The Chicago couple has been diagnosed with this disease. They were discharged from the hospital and are reportedly in home isolation. A possible compromise proposal is in the works that would hike the city's real estate transfer tax on some high-income properties. A coalition of Democratic state lawmakers today announced they've introduced a bill that would raise those transfer rates from properties over $3 million and then again on properties with income over $10 million. Lawmakers say it would also reduce the tax for properties below $1 million. Now, $79 million of this new revenue would go toward curbing homelessness and $88 million to reducing the city's budget gap. Mayor Lightfoot had a proposed graduated real estate transfer tax that would eventually bring in $100 million to city coffers. The mayor's office says it is in negotiations with these stakeholders, and any proposal would have to be approved by the General Assembly and Governor J.B. Pritzker. As for the weather, increasing clouds tonight with a low around 23 and then a high near 36 tomorrow before a round of snow showers moves in. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, an unofficial name change for a West Side park. A local artist highlights disparities in the city with her photography. Community leaders are pushing the Postal Service for answers after reports of Spanish-speaking customers being turned away. People blow off steam by breaking things at a unique local business. And local scientists use a powerful new tool to make fresh discoveries from moon dust first collected nearly 50 years ago. But first, some of today's top business headlines from Crain's. Here's Danny Ecker.
Brandis, the same Illinois privacy law that recently led Facebook to settle a class action lawsuit for $550 million could trip up Google as well. An Illinois man sued the search giant this week, alleging the company violated a 2008 state law related to facial recognition of photos. He argues Google collected biometric data from his facial features in photos he uploaded to the site without his consent. The complaint was filed less than 2 weeks after Facebook agreed to its penalty for the same practice. Attorneys in that case said each Illinois Facebook user could receive $200 or more as part of the settlement. Meantime, Seattle-based consulting firm Slalom says it plans to go on a hiring spree in Chicago. The business and tech advisory firm says it'll hire more than 300 new developers and consultants in the city with a goal of growing its local workforce to 1,000 people by the end of the year. Chicago is the company's second biggest office after it added 200 people between 2016 and 2018 and doubled the size of its office at the Aon Center. Slalom was founded in 2001 and has over 8,000 employees across 35 markets worldwide. And finally, Chicago's former transportation commissioner has landed a new gig running one of the city's prominent civic organizations. Rebecca Scheinfeld has been tapped as the new CEO of the Civic Consulting Alliance. The group works on a pro bono basis, helping newly elected officials navigate transitions and big projects. Among others, it's working on the Chicago Police Department's consent decree compliance and Cook County Assessor Fritz Kage's valuation reforms. For Crain Chicago Business and ChicagoBusiness.com, I'm Danny Ecker. Brandis, back to you.
Thanks, Danny. Signs for Douglas Park on Chicago's west side have received an unofficial update in recent weeks. A second S. First reported by Block Club Chicago, the vigilante change comes after years of activism in North Lawndale to rename the park after abolitionist Frederick Douglass, that's 2 S's, instead of its current namesake, Stephen Douglas, just 1 S. Though advocates are lobbying to make the change official, it hasn't happened yet. Here to weigh in on whether it should happen are Sheila McNary, an executive member of the North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council, and Ted Karamansky, a professor at Loyola University Chicago, where he oversees the public history program. He's also written extensively about Chicago during the Civil War. Welcome to both of you to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Sheila, what's your pitch for why the park should be renamed?
The park should be renamed because it's currently named after Stephen Douglas. He was a slave owner. And Frederick Douglass is an abolitionist. He fought for our rights, freedom for all, not just for black people, but people of color, white people, even rights for women, women rights. We need to change the name because the students have done all of the things that we've asked them to do. We've gotten 4,000 signatures in support of changing the name. And we should not be in a community, 87% black people, with a person's name on the park, Stephen Douglas, that we know was a known slave owner, and he didn't think much of black people as well.
You just mentioned the students. You're referring to the students at Village Leadership Academy. Give us an overview of how this movement kind of got started.
The students in 2017, it's been a while, they came and asked us if we could support them. NLCCC, North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council, if we could help them get the name changed. They got the idea from Alderman Scott. They wanted the whole park to be named after Rekia Boyd, but he suggested that it might be a better thing to do it on a historical figure, Frederick Douglass. So the students did their research on the park, and they came to us and asked, well, they came to me and asked, what should we do? And I said that I'll check with the park to see how we can get that name changed. And they asked for us to get signatures, petitions signed, and get the local officials, public officials, politicians to sign and write a letter of support. And they did all of this, and to get the local organizations to support the effort. So the students did all of that, but it's been stalled. I don't know if the answer is yes or no. Okay. And it's been since 2017.
All right, and we did hear from the Park District. I want to come back to what they've told us as well. But Ted Karamansky, I want to get you in here. Remind us who the park's current namesake, Stephen Douglas, was.
Well, first I want to applaud what the students have done, which I mean, just got to love young people caring about the history in their community. Stephen A. Douglas was one of the great figures of 19th century American history, and particularly important for the development of Chicago. The fact that Chicago develops as an industrial center is in part because he made it the terminus for the Illinois Central Railroad. He got land grants for the Illinois Central Railroad, and that's one of the things that went ahead and really helped build Chicago's industry. He supported the Illinois-Michigan Canal, which made it a transportation center. So Douglas was a key figure. He's a founder of the Democratic Party in the state of Illinois. He was a congressman, a senator, Secretary of State of Illinois, a Supreme Court justice in Illinois. So there was a time, 2 decades at least, where he was the major figure, not just in Illinois, but in the United States, bringing about the Compromise of 1850 that prevented a civil war 10 years earlier that would have resulted in a Southern victory.
So what's your position then on a potential, on the movement to change names?
I think one of the things that makes a city great is the layers of history that we find on the streets, the neighborhoods, the buildings, and Douglas represents an earlier layer on the city who doesn't fit with the community today. But who, when that park was named in 1869 by the people who went ahead and went through the awful Civil War, and Douglas rallied to Lincoln's side and helped bring the Democratic Party to support the initial fight for the Union. These were things that they remembered about Douglas. And if we make a change, and maybe we should, but we should make it knowingly that this was a major figure in Chicago and Illinois.
What would you say his position was on slavery?
Douglas had a very nuanced position. He did not see, like Lincoln, and like many people that we admire today, that it was a moral wrong. Instead, he saw anti-slavery as a mortal danger to the United States, that it would bring about a civil war. And it was his generation that lost 800,000 Americans to go ahead and fight that war that fortunately did bring about the end of slavery.
Now, as I said, the Park District, they did respond to us in a statement saying, quote, there are currently over 100 nameable parks in the CPD, Chicago Park District's inventory. CPD welcomes naming requests for considerations for these locations. Meanwhile, CPD staff have identified 5 locations that are suitable for naming in honor of Frederick Douglass. Quote, we welcome the consideration of other nameable locations. And it goes on to say that there is no precedent for changing the name of a park that has already been named for an historical figure. Sheila McNary, what's been the response from the neighbors in North Lawndale to the second S that's been added by a volunteer?
When we saw that second S, it looked so professionally done. We thought they had changed the name, and we were looking to have a celebration. But we were told it wasn't done officially. And the people in the community were happy about it. So
what's your reaction then to what you just heard from the Park District? Does it sound like?
To me, I think we should have a yes or no answer about that particular park. And Frederick Douglass, he contributed a lot to this country as well. And anyone that's pro-slavery, if they're not an abolitionist, anti-slavery, to me, they are for slavery, and it's immoral, and I don't think that park should be named after Stephen Douglas. There's other places. They have a statue of Stephen Douglas over on 35th Street, and my husband works at the Capitol in Springfield. He said every day he passes by, there's a statue of him down in Springfield. I think we have a lot of monuments in this country of things that celebrate slavery and the atrocities that they put on us as a group of people. And I just think it should not be there. And the people were happy when they saw that S, and I know I was. And I'll still be happy to see it change, but we need to have an answer for that. And it needs to be named after Frederick Douglass, because he was our champion for human rights.
And we're almost out of time. Ted, what do you think we lose if that second S is added and the name is changed?
It's not so much that. In some ways, maybe the community should have a role in deciding, what they want, where their children play. But Douglass was a key figure, and that can't be denied. And the fact that there is a monument to Douglass already in Jackson Park that was put in several years ago, because it sits where he gave his main address at the Columbian Exposition in 1893. If you really want to name a park, change the name of a park, maybe change Jackson Park. There's a slave owner for you. There's a person who exiled Indians.
And there's a story for another day. I'm sorry. Sheila McNary and Ted Karamansky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Chicagoan JENNIKA Johnson is using photography to educate people about the disparities she's noticed within neighborhoods throughout the city. The Folded Map project looks at gentrification and segregation with the help of side-by-side photos of two different neighborhoods with the same address on opposite ends of Chicago. Arts correspondent Angel Edo takes us on a tour around the city to see the impact of the project firsthand.
JENNIKA Johnson wants to change misconceptions about certain neighborhoods in Chicago. So she created the Folded Map project.
Folded Map is a visual investigation of disparity and inequity in Chicago using its mapping system. So I have photographed addresses that are similar on the same streets, like 6720 North Ashland and 6720 South Ashland, and compared them. When people look at those photos, they're able to see the difference in the sidewalks, the landscape, sometimes even just the streets themselves, and the maintenance of the buildings.
Johnson's project started with just that, photos. Soon, those photos turned into conversations. She began reaching out to what she refers to as map twins.
The first iteration of Folded Map just focused on the north and south side, specifically the neighborhoods that if you were to fold Chicago's map at its 0 point would touch Inglewood. And so Inglewood was the south side neighborhood that I focused on because it's so large, which a lot of people don't know. It's like the third largest neighborhood in Chicago.
And just like that, her first set of map twins were born. Inglewood resident Carmen Arnold Stratton quickly realized the city offers more than her neighborhood when Rogers Park resident Bridget O'Shaughnessy was describing her home.
When she said that her neighborhood was a global mecca, I was like, oh, okay, I need to venture out more and not have that stigma of my neighbors that I grew up with. Oh, we're not going there.
The pair say their relationship has only grown since meeting.
We have to show up for each other. And I feel like, yes, there was the first moment when Carmen and I met, and that was a meaningful day. But to me, it's like, how else can I invest in her as a person? Because I think the more we know each other, the more we care. And the more we care, the more we're willing to fight for each other.
Johnson says this developed empathy is one of the many goals of the project. That's why she's housed an exhibit highlighting her research at a local Inglewood shop, Inglewood Branded.
The current exhibit at Inglewood Branded really I would say, is the first example of it making a specific local difference, because people have been coming to Inglewood Branded store that have never visited Inglewood, white and black and Latino and Asian.
The Folded Map project includes more than 10 sets of map and address twins depicted through both videos and photos. I had a chance to sit down with a second iteration of map twins, these two from the city's north and west sides. Johnson says they're the first pair to really talk about gentrification in the city.
I realized when she said that gentrification isn't the only process here that causes people to live separately and in a segregated way, but sort of happening as a result of economics more than anything.
After visiting Joe Bristol's home in Logan Square, Garfield Park resident Q Bila said he realized he had more control over the changes within his neighborhood than he realized.
You know, it made me want to just look more into real estate and investigate and see if that's something that I want to do and, you know, can do financially. It's not necessarily about like being pushed out or, you know, white people coming to take over the neighborhood. You gotta kind of take initiative yourself to learn and educate yourself about what's going on, you know, and then maybe if you want a piece of your neighborhood, you can buy it.
As Johnson continues to publicize the Folded Map Project, she says she's grateful for not only the relationships that have developed, but the necessary conversations they've started.
Also, for the public to have an example of what those conversations could look like and how answering some basic questions really helps you understand not only how to connect to someone else, but really provide you a deeper understanding about our city and how people experience it different based on where they live.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Johnson's exhibit of the Folded Map Project at Inglewood Branded has since come to a close, but the conversations are continuing. Her next Folded Map exhibit will be on display at Woman Made Gallery in Pilsen in June. And now to Paris Schutz and a heated controversy at a Chicago post office. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. A controversy is brewing in the Pilsen neighborhood. Community activists and politicians are calling on the United States Postal Service to make changes at the Pilsen post office. This after a woman reported witnessing a postal clerk berating and turning away a number of Spanish-speaking customers. A spokesman for the USPS says the incidents are under investigation and the Postal Service is actively pursuing bilingual employees to help out there. And here with some more are Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez of the 25th Ward, which includes the Pilsen Post Office, and Evelyn Gonzalez, whose Facebook post went viral after she witnessed the alleged discrimination. And we asked the spokesman for the Postal Service to join the discussion, but he declined our invitation. We welcome you to Chicago Tonight. First, Ms. Gonzalez, recount for me what you witnessed that day at the post office.
Okay, so I went into the post office around 10 o'clock in the morning. It was a Monday, the February 3rd, and there was nothing but Hispanics in line. It was about 3 other customers. And while I was in line, getting ready to send a package, I recalled I heard the post office worker yelling like, "Speak English, I can't understand you. I'm not gonna help you."
And she was doing this to multiple customers?
Yes, of course. Well, the whole 5-10 minutes process that I was there, I witnessed her doing it, so I had to step in every single time to assist the customers. It wasn't until she just kept denying service, even basic information to one of the customers. When she found out she wanted to send a package to Mexico, she was not willing to help at all. She was, "I'm not gonna help."
And what happened when you stepped in?
I stepped in and I was trying to communicate back and forth until I just kind of had enough of her she was being very loud, like very rude. I told her it's not acceptable. Just because they don't speak the language, it does not give you a right to treat them like this. And I eventually got threatened with the cops. She was gonna call the cops on me, have me banned. She told me she had me on camera and all this stuff.
All right, Alderman Sigcho-Lopez, the USPS spokesperson actually has apologized for this and says they're looking into this. What do you know at this point about what happened on that day?
Yeah, so we're actually very thankful for Evelyn for putting forward this complaint and exposing this issue. We were appalled by the number of complaints that follow. That's how after the post went viral, we have several people not only reaching out to Evelyn, reaching to our office.
Saying that they've experienced the same
thing. So that's when we, on Friday, several days later after our due diligence, and we look into this case very carefully, we saw that this is a systemic problem. We went ourselves and looked at the lack of Spanish materials. Indeed, there was not adequate Spanish-speaking staff. So what we obviously demand there are changes, right? So we spoke with Congressman Chuy Garcia, and he also agreed with us that this seems to be a problem that affects residents who don't speak English across the city and in other multiple places. So we were appalled by just the number of complaints.
And the USPS says there's supposed to be signage to help out with Spanish-speaking customers in there. It wasn't easy to find when you went in, was it?
Well, not even then, but even the day of the press conference, believe it or not.
Which was yesterday.
And as we were speaking about the issues of not having Spanish, not only Spanish staff, but materials and posters that they claim that exist, the representative invited the press to come with him, and he couldn't find the posters.
They couldn't find the signage. All right, Ms. Gonzalez, this is your post office. You live in the Pilsen neighborhood. Have you encountered this regularly at this post office?
Oh, it's a normal thing, and I'm so mad that I never spoke about it sooner, because I just thought maybe they were having a bad day, but it's a lot of bad treatment. I understand that you don't communicate in Spanish. I understand all that. Why do you have to treat people like this? It's yelling, it's humiliating. A lot of people have walked out of there technically crying. It's not acceptable.
And Alderman Lopez, is this one employee, or have you found that it's systemic at this place?
Well, we hear that this is one the case, certainly the case of this employee in particular, but we heard other cases in other post offices as well, Chinatown and other locations. So what we're demanding are changes that will make sure that every post office, must have a staff that reflects the needs of each community. In Pilsen, we have a predominantly Spanish-speaking community. In Chinatown, Mandarin and Cantonese. So we got to make sure that we provide a good service for everyone, no matter what is the background.
So the USPS says they're investigating. Do you want discipline for this particular clerk?
That's what we sent a formal complaint to the congressman, Congressman Garcia. He's going to forward that complaint to make sure that there's a full investigation and disciplinary actions. But we also are asking to make sure that there's adequate bilingual staff and materials translated to make sure that our seniors or families across the city, in a welcoming city like ours, in an immigrant working city like ours, that everybody is treated with dignity and respect.
Ms. Gonzalez, you posted this encounter on Facebook. Tell me about the reaction you got.
I mean, it was totally unexpected. I mentioned I was not expecting this. When I posted my experience, I wanted people to be aware, and I posted that. If your elders, go with them to the post office because they're getting mistreated. And it's what I've noticed. And it just went crazy. And there's so many people, oh, I've experienced this. Me too, my dad, my grandma, my mom, they've had issues with other documents in the post office. So it's been...
So a lot of people coming forward. Did you get any folks on the other side?
Yeah, of course.
And what were some of those comments?
Tell me to go back to Mexico.
Oof.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's obviously normal. I mean, not everybody's going to agree with you, but, I mean, I'm glad that this was brought to light, and hopefully we can make a change.
Alderman Sigcho Lopez, is this a problem that you're finding specifically at this post office or in other post office in Spanish-speaking communities? We have Humboldt Park, we have Little Village, communities all over the city.
Yeah, that's what we've seen, even across, if you look at the posts, that's what we see, the complaints, not even only in Chicago, they seem to be in other states as well. So this is a systemic issue. This is something that we need to address, and we need to address with policies. The post office, as a federal independent agency has the responsibility to make sure that it's treating everyone with respect.
What about training for employees that are already there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the discussions that we want to have, and we want to make sure that we monitor the policies that they're going to put in place to make sure that this never happens again.
Are you satisfied with the response from the USPS?
It was an adequate response the day of the press conference. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
You're shaking your head.
I mean, they apologized, but how many people have been discriminated all the time? And it's not, I've ran into neighbors, they hesitate to go into this post office, and they go when they absolutely need to, when it's their last resort, because they get talked down to, they get yelled at. And
so they're avoiding going to the post office?
Yes. Multiple people, I've been stopped, and multiple people message me about it. We've tried avoiding it. A lot of people just go different routes. And it's sad that this is just a post office. Why are we getting treated like this?
And as we were discussing earlier, there's supposed to be signage in there to help with Spanish-speaking customers.
There isn't.
It's not in there.
They also did state that they try to have a bilingual person most of the time. That was USPS statement. That is not true either.
So you've been in there, and obviously the day you were in there and posted this, there was no bilingual clerk.
No, there hasn't been for months. Long time.
Alderman Sigcho Lopez, what else do you want to see happen from this incident?
We will make sure that there are immediate changes. We want to make sure that there's bilingual staff, that we have the signage once and for all, and to make sure that this sets a precedent for other communities so that we are truly a welcoming city, and hopefully that's something that the post office takes upon, not only here in Illinois, but across the country.
All right, Evelyn Gonzalez, Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Well, everybody gets angry sometimes. What matters is how you deal with that anger. And there's one place in Chicago where customers actually pay to break things. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia stopped by the Rage Room to learn a little bit more.
And you're all set. Your time has begun.
This is funny. Emily Sobut's friends are giving her a smashing birthday present.
Oh!
always mad about something, but no, it's mostly for fun. She's loud in general, so she enjoys things like this.
They're at a rage room in Chicago's near North Side neighborhood. Rage rooms are places where people pay to destroy things. In recent years, the trend has gained traction across the country as a way to blow off steam.
I mean, right now I'm not angry, but I got it. When you smack yourself, now you know, mention it.
Business owner Joe Lupa lays down a few ground rules for customers Tamara Andrews and LaRonda Ingram.
Please try and aim everything you're throwing towards that red wall. Besides that, it's super simple. Just use common sense. Keep on all the safety equipment at all times.
As long as customers wear pants and closed-toed shoes, the Rage Room supplies helmets, leather jackets, and objects for smashing.
We get things like computer monitors, TVs, printers, old school computers, speakers, plates, glass, ceramic. That shattering sound is really nice.
Lupa says one of their biggest sellers is a 3D printed bust of President Donald Trump. Customers can also bring their own objects for smashing.
I don't know when the last time you smashed something was on purpose. On purpose is very important, but it's just fun to break stuff. It's really that simple in some ways. It can be much deeper, but it really is that simple at its core.
So I decided to see what all the rage is about. Smashing stuff can be a cathartic experience that releases pent-up frustration or anger. But some mental health professionals warn against this somewhat aggressive form of therapy.
It's not an effective strategy for managing anger because on one hand, people may feel a release of the tension in the body that's associated with anger. So you might walk out and, ooh, that feels good. Because your cortisol and all the other hormones that make you feel agitated, they lessen.
Psychologist Bernie Golden specializes in anger management.
Taking part in this sport doesn't really help people understand their anger. Anger is about a threat as well as negative emotions, so I might feel devalued, disrespected, rejected, discounted. And for many people, it's much more comfortable to be angry and focused on the person or situation than sit with those more uncomfortable feelings. So these kinds of rooms don't help people understand their anger related to those feelings.
Lupa says people visit the Rage Room, which he opened about 3 years ago, for a variety of reasons.
We really do run the full gamut. I've, cried with people in here and celebrated.
But if you have a lot of tension, it just helps. You don't have to take it on anyone else but these items. But I do feel like cleaning up afterwards.
He's had some anger built up that for the past forever that he needs to let out. So I think this is really gonna help.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
Reminds me a little of that scene from Office Space, the movie where they destroy the copy machine. Anyway, got an old computer, TV, or printer? Owner Joe Lupa says you can actually recycle it at the Rage Room. Lupa says every week they sort and recycle the broken pieces of electronic waste customers smash up. And now, Brandis, back to you.
I thought about Office Space too, Paris. Thank you. It's been almost 50 years since astronauts last walked on the moon. That means samples of lunar soil are incredibly precious to science. But now, researchers at the Field Museum and University of Chicago have pioneered a technique that allows them to make big scientific discoveries from a single grain of moon dust. Their findings have just been released in a new study, and joining us now to tell us more are lead author of the study, JENNIKA GREER. She's a PhD student at the University of Chicago and a resident student at the Field Museum, and Philip Heck, a curator at the Field Museum and an associate professor at the University of Chicago, who co-authored the study. Welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining us. So you've been kind enough to bring us a sample of moon rock. Tell us about this, Philip.
So this is a meteorite that arrived from the moon. It got ejected from the lunar surface after something hit the moon, and objects from the lunar surface flew into space and hit Earth. And this was found in 2017 in Northwest Africa and was purchased by private collector Terry Boudreau and donated to the Field Museum for study. So this rock is a breccia. That means it's a rock that contains many fragments that were cemented together by shock. And the black stuff that you can see in this rock are dust particles, similar to the ones that we studied with the new instrument atom probe.
So the dust particles, JENNIKA, this is the part that you're working with, right? Like the lunar samples that are much smaller than this. And you're able to analyze a tiny particle of moon dust using what you just referred to as atom probe tomography.
Yes.
That sounds very sciencey. How does it work?
It works by sharpening a sample to tens of nanometers in diameter, and this sample tip.
Small.
So that's the grain that we started with, and then we sharpen it even further. So we're talking about something that is 1% the size of a human hair, and we apply a very high electric field to it, and then using a laser, we knock off atoms one by one. These atoms are detected, and we can detect both their composition and their position. Using the position, we can reconstruct them into 3 dimensions.
So how did you get the samples of the lunar dust that you've been working with?
So these are samples that were collected by Apollo 17 astronauts. And in order to use these samples, you have to specifically request them from NASA, who will evaluate the science you want to do based on its merit.
And Apollo 17 was in
1972.
Thank you, 72, long time ago. So how is it that such a tiny sample can provide, and we're looking at some images from NASA there right now, but Philip, how is it that such a tiny sample can provide so much research?
Yeah, so basically, interestingly, many processes happen at the outermost surface of mineral grains, of lunar soil grains. And this technique is ideal to study these tiny features that record the interaction of the space weather with the lunar surface. Satellites can observe the moon and determine, roughly how much water is there on the moon, for example. That's very interesting for future astronauts to know where is the water. But there are problems with interpretation, and it depends who you ask. Some say, there's more water at different latitudes. And with this method, we can actually get a lunar sample and do a ground truth measurements from different locations to, for example, quantify how much water is there actually on the moon. And this is not water that like we find it on Earth, but this is water that formed when the wind that comes from the sun, that we call solar wind, interacts with the outermost surface of those mineral particles. So it's really important for future lunar exploration. And with this study, what we have shown that this specific technique, which hasn't been used for that purpose in the past, is very, very useful and uses only a tiny bit of a lunar grain. So this technique is mainly used to study materials to make better cars, better airplanes, and so on.
So were you expecting to find water in your research, or was that a surprise?
Water has been already found on the moon, and so we were actually not that surprised, but with that technique we can actually localize where exactly in each mineral grain the water forms. And this allows us to quantify how much water is there on the moon. The moon was thought to be really dry, but in fact there is water that forms as we speak on the moon just by the solar wind. And there is if you take about 1 ton of material from the lunar surface, you get about 1 kilogram of water.
So, JENNIKA, you all have sent us an animated graphic that kind of tells us how this new method of analysis works. Tell us, how does this new method of analysis work?
So when we analyze the sample, we can actually count the atoms one by one. So in this graphic, each point in that tip, in that cone shape, is an atom, and each atom has a color. So you can see the orange really stands out here. Those are individual iron atoms. And when we're seeing these large clusters of orange, we can say, oh, this is actually metallic iron. And this is not something that normally forms in a mineral like this. So we're seeing materials in this grain that are not in the forms that we might expect. So Philip was talking about the water. We don't see the bubbles of liquid water in the sample. These are individual water molecules that are surrounded by, rock molecules.
And we're almost out of time, but we know that NASA has found that your initial research was interesting enough to agree to fund 3 more years of study. Explain why, what have you found, or why would NASA be interested in this? How is it useful?
So basically, we are interested in finding out how much water is there and how do the different minerals retain the water that has been formed, and how does it vary across the lunar surface. So basically mapping out the water distribution and amount of water on the moon with the samples that are available. And it's important to have a mission return sample because we know where it comes from. This meteorite, for example, we don't know where it came from. With the astronaut return samples, we know where it comes from, so it's really ground truth for the science of the moon.
Okay, Philip Heck and JENNIKA GREER, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.